The family murder that made no sense. The night everything stopped, it started on a cold Sunday morning in Maple Falls, Colorado, a town so quiet that even the sirens felt out of place. At 6:17 a.m. a 911 call came from a man's voice, trembling, incoherent. The dispatcher could only make out fragments. "They're all gone, my family. I just stepped out for a minute." When the police arrived at the Henderson residence, the front door was ajar, snow blowing into the entryway. Inside, the scene was disturbingly calm. The TV in the living room was still on, a Saturday night comedy rerun flickering across the screen. The smell of coffee lingered. But the silence was absolute. Detective Laura Givens led the first team inside. She'd been with the department 15 years, but she said later this house felt wrong the second I crossed the threshold. The home was spotless. No signs of a break-in, no struggle, no blood. The only strange thing was that the kitchen clock had stopped, the hands frozen at 11:42 p.m. The upstairs hallway, 3 bedrooms lined the wall. The first door opened to the Hendersons' teenage daughter's room, empty bed, phone on the nightstand, charging light still blinking. The second belonged to their son, untouched. Video game paused mid-match. When Givens opened the last door, the master bedroom, she found Daniel Henderson, 42, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. His clothes were damp from snow, his hands trembling. "They're gone," he whispered. "All of them. Just gone." Givens scanned the room. The bed was neatly made, the window open just a crack, and a faint draft carried in the smell of pine. There were 3 coffee cups on the nightstand, one still steaming. "Who was here with you, Mr. Henderson?" she asked. "My wife, my kids," he said. "We were watching a movie. I went outside to clear the snow off the sea. So we could drive to my parents' place in the morning. When I came back in, they weren't here." At first, detectives assumed a home invasion or abduction. But the longer they searched, the less it made sense. There were no footprints in the snow leading away from the house, just Daniel's, going to and from the car. No tire marks, no forced entry. By 9 a.m. a full investigation was underway. Dogs were brought in but couldn't pick up a scent trail. Neighbors reported nothing unusual, no noise, no lights, no visitors. Then Givens found something strange. On the kitchen table sat a single piece of paper, a grocery list written in neat handwriting: milk, bread, batteries, rope. But here was the twist: forensic testing later showed it wasn't Daniel's handwriting. It was his wife's, except the note was dated 2 days later. When questioned, Daniel broke down, insisting he hadn't written it and had no idea where his family was. The police detained him overnight, standard protocol for missing persons in the household. But toxicology reports showed no drugs, no alcohol. He passed the polygraph test, barely. Then came the first break. On Monday morning, investigators reviewing the home's smart doorbell camera noticed something odd. At 11:42 p.m., the same time the kitchen clock froze, the footage glitched for exactly 5 seconds. When the feed resumed, the door that had been closed was suddenly wide open, and the family's reflections in the hallway mirror were gone. No one entered. No one left. The timestamp, the frozen clock, the missing reflections, all at the exact same minute. Detective Givens replayed it a dozen times. "It looked," she said later, "like someone had erased them in real time." That evening, police received a call from a gas station 20 miles north. The clerk claimed a man matching Daniel Henderson's description had walked in around midnight, dazed, asking for directions, but security footage confirmed Daniel was still at home during that time, surrounded by responding officers. The man on the tape looked identical to him, same face, same coat, same voice. But the timestamp read 11:42 p.m. Detectives didn't know it yet, but that 5-second glitch would become the most scrutinized piece of evidence in the entire case, and what they'd discover next would tear apart every logical explanation they had. Because when they opened the hidden storage room in the basement, there was a second clock, and it, too, was frozen at 11:42 p.m. The second clock. Detective Laura Givens stood in the Hendersons' basement, flashlight trembling in her hand. The air was colder down there, unnaturally so. The walls were lined with tools, boxes, and Christmas decorations. But tucked in the far corner, hidden behind a shelf of canned food, was a small wooden door nailed shut. It wasn't on the house's blueprints. When her team pried it open, dust poured out. Inside was a narrow room with concrete walls and a single wooden chair. On the opposite wall, mounted at eye level, was a clock identical to the one in the kitchen upstairs. The time, 11:42 p.m. But here's what sent chills through every investigator there. The clock was still ticking. It wasn't frozen like the one in the kitchen. The hands moved normally, but every time they reached 11:42, they reset. Over and over. Like a loop, and there was more. On the floor beneath the chair lay a small, rusted cassette recorder. Givens pressed play. A man's voice came through, distorted but recognizable. Daniel Henderson's. They said we'd wake up here. They said time would stop when we finished it. But they're gone. I didn't mean to. The tape ended abruptly with a clicking sound. Forensics later confirmed the recording was made within hours of the family's disappearance, but there was no tape recorder in the house when Daniel was arrested. The next morning, Givens visited Daniel in County Holding. He looked exhausted, eyes hollow, hands trembling against the table. I didn't do this, he kept saying. They told me not to open the door. What door? Givens asked. The one downstairs, he whispered. The one that wasn't there before. She slid a photo of the hidden room across the table. Daniel froze. That's not mine, he muttered. That wasn't there. Daniel, this was found behind your storage shelves. When did you last go down there? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward and whispered, check the clocks. They're not showing time. They're showing when. By now, the FBI had been called in. The case had made regional headlines. Family vanishes from inside locked home. But as the investigation deepened, the timeline fell apart. Phone records showed Daniel's wife, Rebecca, had made a call to her sister at 11:43 p.m., 1 minute after the power outage that supposedly froze the clocks. The call lasted 22 seconds. When traced, it originated not from the Henderson home, but from a cell tower 90 miles away. And then came another anomaly. The forensics team examined the family's photos. In every printed photo taken within the past year, Rebecca's watch, always visible on her wrist, was set to 11:42. Every single 1.2 days later, construction crews working near an old reservoir, 20 miles north of Maple Falls, reported finding a submerged sedan. The plates matched the Hendersons' missing car. When divers pulled it out, the car looked like it had been underwater for decades, rusted, algae-covered, windshield shattered. But inside, things got stranger. 3 sets of skeletal remains were found in the seats, a man, a woman, and 2 children. DNA tests confirmed what no one wanted to believe. They were the Hendersons, the same family that had disappeared only a week earlier, and sitting in the driver's seat, still intact despite the water damage, was Daniel Henderson's wallet. Inside it, tucked behind a faded photo of his wife and kids, was a folded note written in neat, trembling handwriting. If you find this, don't look for the clocks. Detective Givens didn't sleep for 2 days. She kept staring at the photos, trying to piece together a logic that didn't exist. How could remains decades old belong to people missing for a week? When she finally returned to the Henderson home, she found the basement sealed off, FBI orders. The clocks had been taken for testing. But when she walked into her own office that night, something on her desk made her blood run cold. A small box, no label. Inside, a clock identical to the Hendersons. Its hands pointed to 11:42 p.m. and the second hand was moving. The final clock. If you thought this case couldn't get darker, you're about to see why even the FBI walked away from it. Hit subscribe, because what happens next is the kind of truth no one was ready to believe. Detective Laura Givens sat alone in her office at 2 a.m. The clock from the box ticking faintly beside her. Every few seconds, the red second hand would flicker, not move, but flicker, like a bad frame in an old film reel. She'd sealed the office door, drawn the blinds, and turned off her phone. On her desk, scattered around the clock, were all the case photos, the basement, the submerged car, the grocery list, the tape recorder. Every lead pointed to Daniel Henderson, but none explained how his family could be found decades dead while he was still alive. She pressed play on the tape recorder again, isolating background noise this time. Underneath Daniel's panicked voice, a faint sound could be heard, a rhythmic ticking, identical to the one now echoing in her office. She turned toward the clock. The time was 11:41 p.m. At by dawn, Givens was at the federal lab in Denver, meeting with forensic technician Eli Santos, one of the few people still willing to talk about the clocks. They're not normal, Santos said, flipping through his notes. They run backward, forward, sometimes stop completely. The gears aren't mechanical, they're magnetic. Someone built these with precision. But that's not the strange part. He laid out photos of all 3 clocks found, one from the Henderson kitchen, one from the basement, and the new one sent to Givens. Each clock's serial number was the same, they were all made on the same day, he said. April 16, 1985. Givens frowned. That's 30 years before the murders. Except, Santos continued, the metal composition in each clock shows different levels of decay. The basement clock looks like it's been owned round for decades. The one in your office, it's brand new. That night, Givens drove back to Maple Falls, unable to shake the feeling she'd missed something. Snow drifted through the pine trees as her headlights cut across the old Henderson property, now sealed and abandoned. She parked, flashlight in hand, and entered through the back door. Dust clung to the air. The place smelled of wood rot and time. Down in the basement, the wall where the hidden room once was had been rebuilt. Smooth concrete, freshly poured. But when she pressed her hand against it, she felt something vibrating beneath, a faint hum, rhythmic, mechanical. She crouched down, pressed her ear to the wall. The sound grew louder, tick, tick, tick. She grabbed a hammer from the shelf and struck the wall once. The concrete cracked. A second hit split it open, and cold air rushed out. Behind it was another chamber, smaller, darker, and lined with mirrors. In the center sat a table. And on that table, another clock, 11:42 p.m. next to it, a cassette labeled in red marker, Play ME. When she played it, the voice wasn't Daniel Henderson's this time. It was hers. If you're hearing this, you opened it again. Don't. You already know what happens. The time isn't stuck, it's looping. Every time you open the room, it resets. You're not investigating the crime, Laura. You're repeating it. The tape clicked. Then silence. Givens stumbled backward, flashlight shaking. She looked at her reflection in one of the mirrors and froze. Her reflection wasn't moving. The mirrored version of herself stared straight back, expression blank, unblinking, as the real Givens stepped away in horror. Then, as the basement clock struck 11:42, the reflection smiled and the ticking stopped. 3 days later, the FBI returned to the site after receiving an emergency signal from Givens' badge. They found her car still idling in the driveway, her badge on the hood, and her body camera lying near the basement door. When investigators reviewed the footage, it played normally until the timestamp hit 11:42 p.m. Then, for exactly 5 seconds, the feed glitched. When the image returned, the basement was empty. Only the sound of a clock ticking could be heard. Months later, Maple Falls residents began reporting strange power surges and flickering lights at 11:42 every night. Utility crews couldn't trace the cause, and one morning, the town's post office received a single package with no return address. Inside was a small clock, hands frozen permanently at 11:42 p.m. The label read, "For Detective Givens. In case she wakes up again." If you thought this story was chilling, the next case makes this one look simple. Hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear next might just be the one case no one wants solved.